We're continuing with Parshas Miketz, which is the next parsha with the saga of Yosef and the brothers. And when you look through this parsha, there's a number of major difficulties. Izzy, you're the only man today.
Yes.
Bring up the right side. Okay. So Yosef's behavior to the brothers seems very bizarre and really vengeful to the brothers. Because as we know what happens in this week's parsha, Yosef interprets Paro's dreams. Yosef is made into the viceroy of Egypt. And he tells Paro there's going to be 7 years of hunger, 7 years of wealth, of plenty, followed by 7 years of hunger. He tells Paro to appoint a responsible person to take charge, to save. And indeed, that's what happens. And Paro says, well, I guess there's nobody better than you for the job, so I appoint you the viceroy of Egypt. And he dresses Yosef up in all the regalia of a viceroy. He changes his name to Tzofnas Paneach, an Egyptian name. So for all intents and purposes, Yosef looks like a very contemporary Egyptian, but yet very staunchly religious, as he fortunately marries a Jewish woman. He has 2 Jewish boys, and he is now sitting as the viceroy of Egypt. The 7 years of hunger begin. There's worldwide famine. The only place that has food is Egypt. Egypt has all the food, and not only Egypt, but specifically Yosef's storehouse that he's in charge of, and all the other people who saved in Egypt even, their food spoiled. So literally all the wealth of the entire world and the food for the entire world was in Yosef's storehouses as the viceroy of Egypt, which effectively makes him the most powerful man in the world, because Paro just does whatever Yosef says to do. So when this comes to light, and the brothers are with Yaakov in the land of Canaan, there's a hunger there too, and they're beginning, the resources have depleted, and Yaakov sends the brothers down to Mitzrayim, but he holds back Binyamin. He doesn't want Binyamin to go because he's the only remnant of his beloved wife Rachel. So I'm not going to go through the whole story, but basically when the brothers go down, they're just going down to buy grain. And Yosef, and they don't know that he's Yosef, he gives them the 3rd degree. He says, what are you doing here? You're spies. He says, no, we're not spies. The whole bit. And he's very, very aggressive with them. Extremely aggressive with them. And he accuses them of being spies. He says, if you don't come back with your younger brother, that proves to me you're spies. And he puts Shimon in jail. First he puts them all in jail. Then he takes them out. Then he puts Shimon back in jail. Very, very aggressive behavior. And more than that, he even puts, as the brothers leave and he gives them the grain, he secretly has all the money that they paid put back into their sacks. So on the way home, they find their money's back there, so it's making it look like he's trying to set them up, frame them as thieves. And it's incredibly painful what's going on over here. And when the brothers come down the 2nd time, Yosef makes nice to them, lulls them into a sense of security, and then of course what happens? He slips the goblet into Binyamin's sack, and as they leave Egypt, he sends his soldiers and he claims them as being thieves and dealing terribly. And then the brothers are, as we end the parsha, in a very, very terrible state, as they say, I guess we're your prisoners. So the obvious question, if anybody who's just looking at the story if you just look at the written text, it seems Yosef is being very vengeful to his brothers and acting very poorly. Question number 1. Question number 2, Ramban asks this and others ask this. Yaakov and Yosef had a very, very close relationship. And Yosef was the apple of Yaakov's eye. So you could be, and we know in last week's parsha that Yaakov refused to be comforted over the death of Yosef. It was catastrophic because Yosef was supposed to be as we mentioned on Shabbos, he is the meat of Yesod. He's the one that can put all the pieces together. Without Yosef, the tribes are just 12 separate guys going in 12 separate directions. And the real hope of the Jewish people was that the Yosef would be alive and would be able to lead the Jewish people. And that didn't happen. And certainly the relationship he had with Yosef was very deep. So the pain that Yaakov went through was immense. Was immense. God forbid, no one should know, of a parent losing a child. The pain is terrible. And more than that, most people can maybe recover afterwards because God blesses you that you forget. But God only lets you forget people who are really dead. But people who aren't really dead, you don't forget. So Yaakov really could never forget Yosef. And he was never comforted. He lived in tremendous pain. And you could be sure that Yosef loved his father greatly too. But the question is, so once Yosef becomes the viceroy already, you are the king of the world. Can't you at least send a telegram home saying to your father, I'm okay, I'm alive? Okay, maybe Yosef, maybe he could ask for a little vacation, get the winter break, and leave Egypt. And even not, just send a telegram saying, I'm okay, I'm alive. So why doesn't he do this? And he can. Obviously he can do this because he's the ruler of Egypt. I understand the first 12 years he was a servant, he was a slave, he was in jail. Okay, he couldn't do it. And maybe even telling his father might cause more aggravation. But now he's the ruler of Egypt, and he lets 9 years pass by from when he's the ruler of Egypt, and he says nothing to make his father feel better. That's terrible. So in the first source, Ramban asks this question, and that's what I've underlined. How is it possible he did not send a single letter to his father to inform him of his whereabouts and comfort him? As Egypt is only a 6-day journey from Hebron. It's only a 6-day trip with a slow caravan. So it's a 2-week vacation, back and forth. Even if it were a year's journey, out of respect to his father, he should have notified him, in which case even the ransom of his person would be ever so costly. He would have redeemed it. So why didn't he? So the answer is because Yosef saw that the bowing down of his brothers, as well as his father and all of his family, could not possibly be accomplished in their homeland. And he was hoping that it would be effected in Egypt when he saw his great success there. So what the Ramban answers is we come back to Yosef's dreams of last week's parsha. He had the 2 dreams that he first dreamt, that the brothers' bundles bowed down to his bundle, and then he dreamt how the sun, the star, and the moon, and the 11 stars bow down to him. So he was given prophetic visions that had to come true. And that means his brothers were supposed to bow down to him. And then later his brothers and his father and mother were supposed to bow down to him. So he felt that these dreams, being, as we said last week, it was a prophecy in potential, if you recall, but yet it was still a prophecy. And as we saw at the end of last week's parsha, the prophecy, the potential became a reality, and that now is true, and it is a true prophecy. So in fact, it's a true prophecy. The prophecy has to come true, and it means his brothers are going to have to bow down to him. And it means then, and the second time, his brothers and his father and his mother are going to have to bow down to him. So there's a sequence that has to happen. And he can't, he can't damage that dream to come true. He can't affect it in a negative way. If he lets them know he's the leader, they're never going to bow down to him. If he says, I'm alive, this isn't going to happen. So he has to play it out. He has to let the dream unfold. And will only unfold if he acts like he doesn't know who they are. As indeed, that is exactly what happened. That is exactly what happened. When the brothers came down, they bowed down to him. And what does the pasuk say? It says, and Yosef remembered the dreams that he had. And you see, the dreams are beginning to come true. The first dream is coming true. Now I got to make it that the second dream comes true. And it has to be in that order. First the brothers, and then later the brothers and the fathers. And that's how he ends off the Ramban. This was all the more so after he heard Paro's dreams, from which it became clear to him that all of them were destined to come there, because it was a hunger, so they're going to have to come. And all his dreams would be fulfilled. So what was he doing? He was making sure that the prophecy that came to him in the dream would come true. That's Ramban's answer. The question that has to be asked on this is, how does that answer all the years of suffering for his father, just so that the vision could come true? And this whole sequence of how he does things is still a very big mystery of why that has to be. So, to explain this, we're going to use the commentary of the Alshich, Rav Moshe Alshich. He has a wonderfully deep and mystical commentary on the Chumash. And some believe that what he wrote was literally with Ruach HaKodesh, with the Divine Spirit. He's considered a very unique author. There's a story that's mentioned about him in Parshas Vayetze. If you recall, in Parshas Vayetze, Lavan cheated Yaakov 100 times. So the Alshich was giving a shir in his shul, he was giving a class in his shul, and he listed the 100 ways that Lavan cheated him, that Lavan cheated Yaakov. We don't know what they were, this instead of that. He went through, explained all 100 ways. So there was a stranger that walked into the shul, and that came in to hear right before the rabbi got up to speak. And then after the lecture, the stranger gets up, he says, "It's true, and I know that it's true," and he leaves. So many understand it to be the soul of Lavan, who came to, so there wasn't, if the story's true or not, they don't say stories about that, about you and me. They say it about the Alshich. All right, so the Alshich was a very holy man. So, then the Alshich is buried where? He's buried in the famous mountain in Tzfas, right next to all the other holy rollers, the Beis Yosef, all the big Rav Moshe Carvera. They're all there. Those are the ones that are painted blue. The stones are painted blue. So next time you go to Tzfas, you go to that mountain there where all the holy people are buried. He's right there. Tzfas, the mystics. Anyway, what does he say? He bases his answer on a very famous principle that many of us know, and that is called the principle of Midah Keneged Midah. When God operates his system of divine justice, he operates within a system called Midah Keneged Midah. Literally, it means measure for measure. So, there's two understandings of what that means, and that should not be mistaken with the secular understanding, of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, which is totally incorrect, or the punishment fits the crime. All these ideas, it's not exactly what God has in mind. So there's really two reasons why God operates measure for measure. Number one, it's the most justified way of operating, number one. And number two, and this is the most important part, is we got to understand, Hashem does not derive any pleasure from disciplining us. He didn't create us to punish us. He created us to give us pleasure. When we do something wrong, it grieves God greatly. And all God wants is only one thing. What's that? We should behave. We should behave, that's all. We should behave the way we're supposed to behave. And therefore God will be able to reward us. At the end of the day, Hashem only wants to reward us. And he only can reward us if we do what we're supposed to do. Now what happens when we're not doing what we're supposed to do? And we go on our merry old way, thinking we're wonderful people, but we're not. So, sometimes you have people who will criticize you and will rebuke you and discipline you, and that may help. But at the end of the day, who really understands what you're doing wrong and right? It's God. God only knows what's in the true heart of people. So God takes the role of being the ultimate disciplinarian. Now the point of disciplining us, this one's a very bad translation. It's very not hard. It's hard to have a good translation of what God does with us, of what we call punishment. It's all terrible words to use. It's just God wants to correct our poor behavior. That's all he wants. And not because he's not like a teacher who's trying to teach in a classroom who needs quiet. And if the class is making noise, it disrupts the classroom, and now it becomes a power struggle between the teacher and the kids who are disturbing. It's not even that. It's very simple. God isn't great. God wants you to be the best person you can be, and that's for your benefit. That's for your benefit. The better person that you are, the more you will enjoy the relationship with Hashem. It's all for your benefit. So if you're making mistakes, so what is that doing to the relationship? It means you are making yourself bad. You're making bad decisions. You're hurting yourself. You can't have a relationship with Hashem. And Hashem wants you to benefit from having this relationship. So what does he have to do? He has to get your attention. He has to get your attention, and this is the best educational tool he can use. Meaning to say that if you're doing something wrong in a particular area, God communicates to you what the problem you have is, and then you on your own can come to the realization that you've made that mistake, and you can perceive what you've done wrong, and then you can correct the mistake yourself. And that is ultimately the end goal, is that you should just be a good person and be deserving of God's love. But that only happens if you change it yourself. It's self-internalized and eternally driven to be the better person because you want to be the better person. And you just didn't realize that you were doing things that were wrong. So now that you realize you've made a mistake, so it's not just God says you've done something wrong, you have to get punished. The idea of punishment per se, where does God's punishing come into play over here? So it's really not punishing, it's cleaning up. When a person does something wrong, he creates a damage. You create a damage to yourself, you create a damage to others, you create a damage in the mystical spheres of the reality of the world. You've created a damage, and God just wants one thing: clean up the damage. It's damage control, damage correction. Why? So that you will be better off for it. So we will use the word punish. It's not really the best word. Punish means something I do punitively to make your behavior conform to what I want. But it's not necessarily the person being punished is going to gain from it. And not a lot of punishments are designed for the person to gain. Person does a crime. He's a robber. They throw him in jail for 2 years. How does that help him any? Is he going to come out of jail now not wanting to steal? That's not a solution. You see, in the Torah has altogether different solutions to these ideas. Not just to punish, but to have the person measure for measure realize what he did wrong and to want to change that behavior himself. So again, in the oversimplified version of this, and life is never this simple, sometimes, but the oversimplified version is, if a person is speaking Lashon Hara, a person is speaking terrible about other people, so he's creating a terrible damage. It's a terrible thing to talk Lashon Hara. So God, in his infinite kindness, and again, this is not necessarily the first line of operation, but eventually the person will have to suffer consequences in a similar way, so he'll realize that maybe he's talking Lashon Hara. So if he wakes up one day with 12 cold sores in his mouth, and he's in tremendous pain, and it hurts him so much to talk, the person should think, maybe I've done a sin with my mouth that needs to be corrected. Maybe I need to introspect. And now if you introspect and realize, I think I've been talking way too much Lashon Hara lately, I'm going to stop talking Lashon Hara. And that isn't because God needs you to speak Lashon Hara, it's because you need to stop speaking Lashon Hara. So then thank God he gave you the cold sores. And now and at the end of the experience, the cold sores will go away, and so will your Lashon Hara go away. Now, it's easier said than done. It's easier said than done. Many times, the Mida Keneged Mida, the measure for measure, is not so overtly clear. And there are times when people don't get the message, which is a really sad situation. But that's the general system of how God operates. Okay, any questions on that point? I'll take a question. If anybody wants to ask a question, right? Just to make sure we got that point very clear. I want people to get the wrong idea about God's system of discipline over here. Yeah.
So
just relating to the point. Yeah.
Realizing. So are we going to discuss what the sin was that
the brothers?
not the brothers, that his father performed to get this.
So we'll talk a lot about the brothers, not more about the brothers than the father, as we will see. But we'll try to sneak that into. Okay. So now we understand the concept. So, and let's take a look at two examples in last week's parsha that give us this example. So look, for example, in the second source, the Rashi. Rashi says that Yosef did a number of things when he was tangling with his brothers. It says, the pasuk says, he brought their evil report. So what does Rashi say? Whatever he saw wrong in his brothers, his sons, the sons of Leah, he reported to his father. He went to Yaakov and says, "Look, I want you to know your children are doing things that aren't right, that aren't proper." And he did it because he wanted the father to give them the proper discipline. And he did it for pure reasons. Because after all, he's one of the youngest. He knows the brother's not going to listen to him. So he'll tell the father, "I just want you to know the brother's doing certain things wrong. And I'm telling you so you'll help them become better." That's all. He wasn't trying to shaft them or make them look bad in front of his father. He genuinely wanted their behavior to improve. If you love another person, you want their behavior to improve. So, for example, he reported to his father. He said that they used to eat flesh cut off from a living animal. There's a prohibition of eating an animal while it's still alive. If you cut off its foot while it's alive. I understand this practice is still done in very fancy restaurants in the Orient, where they get an animal caged under the table, and there's a little hole under the top of the table, and they fry the animal and cook it, and you eat it while it's alive. It's a great delicacy that the Orient is big on. Okay, so you can't do that. Or let's say the animal's running around, you chop its leg off and eat it. Right. So anyway, he reported that the brothers did that. Okay. He also reported that they treated the sons of the handmaids, the four sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, with contempt, calling them slaves. That was the second thing he did. And number three, they were suspected of living in an immoral manner. Those are the three things he reported to the father. So Rashi says, with these three similar matters, he was therefore punished. In a similar way, he was punished in that matter. Number one, it says, and he said that they ate meat from a living animal. So what happens when they sold him, before they sold him and they dipped his coat in blood, what did they do? They slaughtered an animal. They slaughtered the animal according to halacha, then took its blood and dipped it into the blood, into his shirt, into the blood. So that was number one. That was against the fact that they said that that they were eating food that was from a living animal. And because he slandered them and saying that the brothers called the other brothers slaves, so he became a slave. He was sold into being a slave. And the third one, he charged them with immorality, so he was put in a situation of potential immorality when the wife of Potiphar wanted to seduce him. So Ra's saying, you see, there's the measure for measure. He said 3 lies against the brothers, or mistakes, not lies, mistakes. He mistakenly misinterpreted what was going on. And I don't have time to get into that. It's a whole other class. And he was shown up that you were wrong. So Reb Chaim Shmulevitz asks a question. He says, let's try to understand this. Okay, the fact that he said that the brothers called the other brothers slaves, right? And he was mistaken in that area. So God made him into a slave. So good. So when he's a slave, he says, I wonder why God made me into a slave. So he starts thinking, why did God make me into a slave? I guess I must have done something bad about being slaves. Oh yeah, it probably was the fact that I told on my brothers that they called the other brothers slaves. I shouldn't have done that. Okay, I'll correct that behavior. Okay, that we can make the connection. The fact that he charged the brothers with living immorally. So guess what? He's put in a situation where he's tempted to be immoral. He says, why is God sending me this woman to tempt me to be immoral? Must be I did something wrong about accusing someone else of being immoral. I guess I made a mistake by thinking the brothers were immoral. I guess they weren't immoral. So again, the connections can be made. But Reb Chaim asked, but what about the fact that he said that the brothers ate, and more than that, and he suffered. He suffered. He suffered. The wife of Potiphar was tempting him. That was a suffering. He was called a slave that was suffering, so he was punished, as it were. So, okay, I understand why I was punished. I was punished to hurt in this area, so I'll do tshuva in an area that's Similar to that. That's okay. But how about the one where he said they're eating the flesh of the living animal? So what was the punishment? What was the punishment for that? So all it says, well, he was shown that when they sold him, before they sold him, they slaughtered the animal properly. So what kind of punishment was that? It wasn't a punishment for him. The fact that they slaughtered, and if they didn't slaughter the animal, the fact they dipped the coat in blood had nothing to do with the way the animal was slaughtered. So how is that a punishment? And Rashi used the expression laka. If you look in the Rashi in the Hebrew version, the original version, Rashi used a very interesting word. He says, where am I? So he says, "Ubishloshtam laka." With all three, he was smitten. I don't know what does the English say over here? He was therefore punished. Laka literally means to be hit. So what does it mean? So Reb Chaim explains that the point of measure for measure, this proves the point. Measure for measure is that you have to be punished. You just have to be shown you made the mistake. So sometimes it comes in the form of a punishment. When you're hurting, then you notice the mistake. And sometimes you can just be shown your mistake by seeing that you're right to your face, that you were wrong. So the fact that in 2 out of the 3 cases he happened to get a punishment, so through the punishment, through the suffering, he was able to see it. But in the first example, he claimed that they they ate animals without slaughtering them first. So he said, Hashem said, I'm going to show you that they do the opposite of what you said. That when they were going to sell you, they went and right in front of your eyes, you're going to see, they take a goat and they shecht it properly. So that shows you that you were wrong. You were wrong about your analysis to them. And being shown that you're wrong was the main point. So you don't necessarily have to be punished per se, but the whole point of measure for measure is the person should see the mistake. So when he sees that they went out of their way to slaughter the animal properly, so then he understood, I made a mistake, and that was the laka that was being shown that he made that mistake. Yes?
Sir, was he shown in a vision? Because he says they did it after they sold him. It seems that the Rashi says that after they...
Why?
They slew a he-goat after they sold him.
I don't know if that's in the English. I don't know if that's really what it means. That's not really what it means. 1 second. Let's look inside. In the Hebrew doesn't say that. That's what the English says. Look in the original. The original says, Al Evrim Achai, V'yishchatu Seir Izim B'mechiraso, when they sold him. V'loch L'chai, they didn't eat it alive. B'mechiraso. And it had to be before.
Yes.
Because they didn't, right? They first showed him that it was in blood. All right. So that's another example. Just one more example of this. The third source. It says, so they sold him to a caravan of Arabs. And then the Torah writes that the caravan was laden with very nice spices. So Rashi asks the question, what do I care what the caravan was loaded with? Just say they sold him to a caravan going down to Mitzrayim. Finished. No, the caravan was loaded with spices. So Rashi there says, why does Scripture specially announce that the third source they were laden with? Is to tell you how great is the reward of the righteous. It is not usual for Arabs to carry anything but naphtha and itran, meaning oil and tar, which are evil smelling. Usually the Arabs are carrying oil. That's their main commodity. So when they're taking a caravan, they're bringing down that or tar, and it smells terrible. But for this one, Yosef, the righteous, it was specially arranged that they should be carrying fragrant spices so that he should not suffer from a bad odor. The tzaddik shouldn't suffer. So now, that's a very unusual Rashi. Yeah, imagine, picture now, you're Yosef. You got this? You're Yosef. Your brothers now wanted to kill you. Okay, they wanted to kill you. They throw you into a pit with poisonous snakes. They take you out of the pit. Your color is white. They sell you down to a bunch of Arabs to Mitzrayim. That's in order to be contemporary. It's like being sentenced to Devil's Island. That's what it was called, right? Or Alcatraz. You know, like there's no escape. Like it wasn't like you go down to Egypt, I guess I'll figure a way to get out. Nobody got out of Egypt. You went down to Egypt, it was a death sentence. It was a death sentence. So now, and he's going down there. So God said, I don't want the tzaddik to suffer so much. I'm going to make sure it smells nice. Like that makes a difference. You can imagine when they took the Jews in the cattle cars. You can imagine the Nazis put nice smelling scents in the cattle cars. Oh, for the tzaddik, they feel a lot better. Right? So, what's going on over here? So there's an amazing lesson over here. It's an amazing lesson. It's called the pinpoint accuracy of God's divine influence in our lives, and the pinpoint accuracy in how He deals with us measure for measure. In other words, Yosef did certain things wrong, and because he did certain things wrong, he needed to work on himself. And part of the plan was to go down to Mitzrayim. And that's part of the quote-unquote punishment, part of the discipline. Part of the discipline will require him to go down to Egypt, and he himself will learn some of his mistakes that he made. He will learn the mistake that he called the brothers immoral. He'll be tested with immorality. He called them a slave. He'll be made a slave. That's all part of what God has to do for him to learn the lesson. But what did he do bad that he should smell a terrible smell going down? Nothing. So that much he doesn't deserve. So therefore, what you deserve, you deserve. And what you need. But what you don't need, why do I have to give you more than what you don't need? If he'd go down and there'd be a foul-smelling thing, he'd be thinking, what did I do wrong that I'm smelling this foul smell? And he wouldn't be able to find anything because he didn't do anything wrong for that. So now he had to go down with beautiful-smelling things. So you see how the measure for measure is pinpoint accurate. What God needs to make, He does, and not a step more. And even if He's going to make it, it's such an unusual caravan. I wonder how did it come that they picked up these spices? It's unbelievable how that happened. 1 in a million. But Yosef shouldn't have to suffer more. So that itself, if a person is able to, and Yosef was probably able to understand all this. He internalized all this. He understood. As time passed, he says, why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to me? I guess I was doing something wrong over here. I guess I was doing something wrong over here. I have to improve in these areas. And he did. And he was able to see with clarity that God is teaching him exactly what mistakes he makes. So Yosef learns these lessons very well. It's parenthetically a very important idea. A lot of times when things are not going good in our lives, right? Now again, I have to also say one other point because people can misconstrue this whole class and walk out with a very terrible idea. If you're ever going to see somebody else suffering, don't say, well, the rabbi said I should see what that person is doing wrong, and I should go over them and tell them what they're doing wrong to know the measure for measure. That's not for others to play the game. It's for the person himself to play the game. Why? Because we're not in a position to judge others. We don't know what true good and true evil people do behind closed doors or in their minds. There's only one judge, and that's God. And that's why this whole principle only works, is only meant for the person on the receiving end. You understand? Don't apply this to say, oh, I saw that you lost a lot of money. I guess you're a pretty big Russia in terms of not giving tzedakah. I think you better start giving more tzedakah. That's not your job. Now, on the other hand, a person who's clever, and is we'll call the victim, whatever you want to say, a person who's suffering, if he's clever, he may say, God's doing this to me. I'm not really sure why. I guess I'm a little bit biased. Maybe I should go to a friend and ask the friend to give some suggestions that I might want to consider. And even then, if you're a friend, you better be really careful about it. Because Gemara tells us a story about a rabbi who was suffering, and the rabbis came to visit him. And the rabbis didn't say anything. And then the rabbi says to him, maybe you'll tell me why I'm suffering. And they told him good and well, and he didn't accept it. He got angry at them. So you got to be very careful. You got to say, first say, well, why am I suffering? They tell over. What was the story? I think in the introduction to the book of Why Bad Things Happen to Good People, there was this fellow, University of Chicago campus. Was jogging one day, and all of a sudden this hoodlum comes in and just sprays the place with bullets. And this guy who was like on the track team and was a good-looking guy, he was like a 4-letter man, and he had 4-point average, got everything fine, He's a senior or whatever, and he got hit in the spine. He was rendered a quadriplegic. But it's in that book. I think it's in that book too. I think it's in that book. So he's rendered quadriplegic. So then they asked if the rabbi visited him in the hospital, or the friends came to visit him. I don't remember exactly. The friends came to visit him. So he says out loud to the friends, he says, "I can't understand why God did that to me." So the friend said, "I'll tell you why God did it to you. Because you were a real arrogant slob, and now God wants to knock you down a few pegs." Suffice to say, he didn't appreciate that line. Now, it could be maybe what they said was true. I don't know. Nobody knows. But when he said, "Why did God do that?" he wasn't really looking for an answer. He was looking for relief. So you have to be careful when somebody says, "I don't know why God is doing this to me." Don't give the answers. Because the person is not interested in an answer. They just want to complain. You just listen. And you are empathetic. Say, "I know it's hard. It's hard to understand why. I really feel bad for you." That's all they want to hear. If the person will say, "Listen, you know what? I've been learning Torah and I must have been doing something terrible and I checked and I can't figure it out. Please help me." And then you'll say, "I really don't think it's a good idea because you won't want to hear what I might suggest. And I don't want to, make any suggestions to hurt your feelings." Unless the person's mom is begging you, not a good idea. Now you might, drop a few hints, and maybe they could figure it out by themselves. Maybe you could leave a book hanging around with a title that might suggest, the art of giving charity. Just kind of leave it on the table, maybe, if you feel they don't give enough tzedakah. But it's a difficult game for friends to play. So all I wanted to bring out is that the main lesson is for us to look inside ourselves. That's the point. I don't want us to walk up with the wrong idea. If you have a problem, then you have to realize the first rule is, what have I done that's measure for measure in this line? Now, could be you'll find out that you didn't come up with anything. So the Talmud says, if you don't come up with anything, then we know for sure what it is. What is it? What is it is you're not learning enough Torah. Because if you learned enough Torah, you'd know what you did wrong. Let's say, for example, a person doesn't know about this idea of Lashon Hara. Not all Jews know about this thing called Lashon Hara. They figure you're allowed to say bad things about people as long as it's true. People think it's okay, think it's a mitzvah. So then all of a sudden a person is suffering terribly in their mouth. And they're like, what did I ever do? I didn't do anything. I'm always nice. I always tell the truth. Right? They don't realize that itself is the biggest error. So why are you suffering? Because you didn't learn. So if you don't know why, you could assume that it's because you didn't learn. So then you got to ask someone and say, I'm not so learned. Maybe you could tell me a few things that relate to the mouth, maybe. Now someone give you a random list. And you could say, well, I could just tell you, here's a number of sins relating to the mouth. I don't know if any of them apply to you. You might want to think about it. It's very important, when you're trying to help people, you don't accuse. You just say, like a good lawyer, I give you all the information on the table, and it's for you to decide how to do things. Or a good accountant. So a friend has to be like that too. So anyway, that's the rule how to deal with these things.